There we go. Science. Welcome back to Fraggoth Reads. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggoth, and today we are reading the final installment of Distress by Greg Egan. So previously on, what happened last time? Geez, a lot is happening all at once. So, for starters, Andrew Worth has successfully gotten Violet Mosala on a plane off of Stateless and to South Africa, where she is being treated. I can't remember if that's been successful or not, the treatment. Let's see. Buzo is dead, murdered by someone lurking in the bathroom of his apartment. Or hotel suite. We don't know who. Let's see. Oh, right. The mercs who took over the airport on Stateless have started an artillery bombing indiscriminate explosion campaign that is blowing up buildings across Stateless, basically herding people, the denizens, the populace, to the coastal regions, and then sicking their cloaked bugbots on people and killing random individuals in order to inflict maximum demoralization and terror. Welcome, Jim Burke. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome. Hopefully, it's everything you hoped it would be. What else is happening? Oh, right. So, at the end of last time, let me whip open the book here. At the end of last time, here we go. Why aren't we dead? The overhang can't float without the lithophiles. Why aren't we drowning? No one touched the lithophiles in the overhang. The militia sent divers to the edge of the Guyot and pumped in primer to make the lithophiles degas the reef rock just above the basalt. Water flooded in, and the surface rock at the center is heavier than water. I look at it this way. We've lost a city, but we've gained a lagoon. So the denizens didn't cause the lithophiles to do their thing. They, the militia did. Or was that their militia? Their militia did do that. So this changes the terrain of Stateless and presumably stymies the mercenaries to some degree, is my understanding. I think we'll have a better, more thorough explanation as we go. This will be a fairly short one. There aren't that many pages left. And there is a brief author's note at the very end, which I'll read, but it's not much. It's like a paragraph. As opposed to him writing like a minor dissertation like he did for Dichronauts and the Clockwork Rocket / Arrow of Time orthogonal trilogy. I'm not entirely convinced that Greg Egan is not in some way some sort of a collective pen name, because sometimes the narrative voice between books is rather different. That's a pet theory. I don't hold much stock in it myself. But props to Greg Egan for managing to successfully keep from being accurately tagged on any photos online. That takes some doing in current era, and I approve of anyone who tries. And I'm impressed as hell by anyone who succeeds. Alrighty, if there's anything weird with the sound quality, do not hesitate to tell me. It is better that I know, even if it is not an issue. And let's get rocking with the rolling. All right, I'm going to slurp some water down here, where you won't hear it, and get reading.
Part 4. Chapter 29. The camp was in jubilant disarray. There were thousands of people out in the moonlight, checking each other for injuries, raising collapsed tents, celebrating victory, mourning the city, or soberly reminding anyone who'd listen that the war might not be over. No one knew for certain what forces, what weapons might have been concealed far from the city, safe from the devastation of the center's collapse, or what might yet crawl out of the lagoon. I found Achille unharmed, helping with the marquee which had fallen onto the water pumps. We embraced. I was bruised all over, my face was caked with blood, my thrice reopened wound was sending out flashes of pain like electric arcs, but I'd never felt more intensely alive. Achille pulled free of me gently. At 6 a.m., Mosala's TOE will be posted on the nets. Will you sit up with me and wait? V looked me in the eye, hiding nothing, afraid of the plague, afraid of facing it alone. I squeezed V's arm. Of course. I went to the latrines to clean up. Mercifully, the sewage conduits remained open, and the raw waste previously discharged hadn't been forced back up to the surface by the compression waves of the quake. I washed the blood off my face and then cautiously unbandaged my stomach. The wound was still bleeding thinly. The cut from the insect's laser ran deeper than I'd realized. When I bent over the wash basin, I could feel the 2 walls of flesh on either side of the gash, some 7 or 8 centimeters long, slide against each other, disconnected except for at the ends. The burn had cauterized tissue all the way through the abdominal wall, and now the dead seam had split open. I looked around. There was no one else in sight. I thought, this is not a good idea. But I'd already been pumped full of antibiotics against the risk of internal infection. I closed my eyes and forced 3 fingers deep into the wound. What are you doing, bro? I touched the small intestine, blood warm, not snake cold, resilient, muscular, and unslick beneath my fingertips. This was the part of me which had almost killed me, subverted by foreign enzymes mercilessly wringing me dry. But the body is not a traitor. It only obeys the laws it must obey in order to exist at all. Pain caught up with me, and I almost froze. I imagined spending my life as Bonaparte or a self-doubting Thomas. But I jerked my hand free and then leaned against the plastic barrel of the wash basin, punching the side. I wanted to stare into a mirror and proclaim, "This is it. I know who I am now, and I accept, absolutely, my life as a machine driven by blood, as a creature of cells and molecules, as a prisoner of the TOE." There were no mirrors, though. Not in the latrines of a refugee camp, not even on Stateless. And if I waited a few more hours, the words would carry more weight, because by dawn I'd finally know the whole truth about the TOE which enabled me to speak them. I'm probably going to have to put in a warning in the playlist description about body horror and squick factor. I may just have to do that, because there's a lot more in this one than I remembered. I'll definitely have to do it for Morphotrophic. That's, great book, great fun, but, deeply uncomfortable from a body horror perspective. Horror. On my way back to meet Achille, I took out my notepad and scanned the international nets. The anarchists' strike against the mercenaries was being talked about, breathlessly, everywhere. CNET's coverage was the best, though. It started with a view of the lagoon itself, huge and eerily calm in the moonlight, almost a perfect circle, like some ancient flooded volcanic crater, an echo of the hidden Guillot below. I felt, in spite of everything, a pang of sorrow at the death of the mercenaries whose faces I'd never seen, who'd been betrayed by solid rock, and had drowned in terror for nothing but money and the rights of Ingenuity's shareholders. The journalist spoke. A woman, out of shot, a professional with optic nerve taps. It may take decades to reveal exactly who funded the invasion of Stateless and why. It's not even clear as I speak whether or not the desperate sacrifice of the residents of this island... Oh, gosh, I don't know how to read good. It's not even clear, as I speak, whether or not the desperate sacrifice the residents of this island have made will save them from the aggressors. But I do know this. Violet Mosala, the Nobel laureate who was evacuated from Stateless in a critical condition less than 24 hours ago, had intended to make this island her new home. She had hoped to lend the renegades enough respectability to enable a group of nations opposed to the UN boycott to speak their minds at last. And if the invasion was an effort to silence those dissenting voices, it now seems doomed to failure. Violet Mosala is in a coma, fighting for her life after an attack by a violent cult, and the people of Stateless will be struggling harder than ever to survive the next few years, even if peace has come to them tonight. But the astonishing courage of both will not easily be forgotten. There was more, with some of my footage of Mosala at the conference, and this journalist's own coverage of the shelling, the dignified exodus from the city, the establishment of the camps, and an attack by one of the merchants' robots. Mercenaries' robots, Jesus. I don't know how I misread that. My apologies. It was all immaculately shot and edited. It was powerful, but never exploitative, and from start to finish, it was unashamed, but absolutely honest, propaganda for the renegades. I could not have done it half as well. The best was yet to come, though. As the view returned to the dark waters of the lagoon, the journalist signed off. This is Sarah Knight for CNET News on Stateless. As far as the personal comnets were concerned, Sarah Knight was still incommunicado in Kyoto. Lydia wouldn't take my call, but I found a CNET production assistant willing to pass on a message to Sarah. She called me half an hour later, and Akili and I dragged the story out of her. When Nishide became ill in Kyoto, I told the Japanese authorities exactly what I thought was happening, but his pneumococcus sequenced as an unengineered strain, and they refused to believe that it had been introduced by a Trojan. Trojans were bacteria which could reproduce themselves and their hidden pathogenic cargo, without symptoms or an immune response, for dozens of generations, and then self-destruct without a trace, leaving behind a massive but apparently natural infection to swamp the body's defenses. After making so much of a stink, and no one believing me, not even Nishide's family, I thought it would be wise to keep a low profile. We weren't able to talk for long. Sarah had to get an interview with one of the militia's divers, but just as she was about to break the connection, I said haltingly, The Mosala documentary. You deserved the commission. You should have got it. She made as if to laughingly dismiss the whole question as ancient history, but then she stopped herself and said calmly, That's true. I spent 6 months making sure I was better prepared than anyone else, and you still came along and stole it in a day, because you were Lydia's blue-eyed boy and she wanted to keep you happy. I couldn't believe how hard it was to get the words out. The injustice was blindingly obvious, and I'd admitted it to myself 1,000 times, but some splinter of pride and self-righteousness resisted every step of the way. I said, I abused my power. I'm sorry. Sarah nodded slowly, lips pursed. Okay, apology accepted, Andrew. On one condition. You and Akili agree to be interviewed. The invasion is only half the story here, and I don't want the fuckers who put Violet in a coma to get away with anything. I want to hear exactly what happened on that boat. I turned to Akili. V said, Sure. We exchanged coordinates. Sarah was on the other side of the island, but she was working her way around to all of the camps, hitching rides with the militia. 5 a.m., she suggested. Akili laughed, flashing a conspiratorial glance at me. Why not? No one's sleeping tonight on Stateless. The camp was full of the sounds of celebration. People streamed past the tent, laughing and shouting, shrunken silhouettes against the moonlight. Music from the satellites, from Tonga, from Berlin, from Kinshasa, blasted out of the main square, and someone, somehow, had found or made firecrackers. I was still intoxicated with adrenaline, but ragged with fatigue. I wasn't sure if I wanted to join the party or curl up and hibernate for a fortnight, but I'd promised to do neither. Achille and I sat on the sleeping bag, warmly dressed, with the tent flap closed. The electricity was fading. We passed the hours talking, scanning the nets, lapsing into awkward silences. I longed to bring Ver, somehow, inside the aura of invulnerability I felt, having survived my own imagined apocalypse. I wanted to comfort Ver in any way I could. My judgment was paralyzed, though. V's body language had become opaque to me, and I had no sense of how or when to touch Ver. We'd lain together naked, but I couldn't keep that memory, that image, from signifying more to me than it could ever mean to Ver. So we sat apart. I asked why V hadn't mentioned the mixing plague to Sarah. Because she might have taken it seriously enough to spread word, start a panic. Don't you think people might panic less if they knew the cause? Achilles snorted. You don't believe what I've told you about the cause. Do you think people would react to the news with anything but incomprehension or hysteria? Anyway, after the Aleph moment, the victims will know far more than anyone who hasn't mixed could ever tell them. And there'll be no question of panic then. Distress itself will have vanished. Most of this was said with absolute conviction. It was only with the last pronouncement that V seemed to waver. I asked tentatively, so why did the moderates get it so wrong? They had their own supercomputers. They seemed to know as much about anthrocosmology as anyone. If they could be mistaken about the unraveling... Achille gave me a long, hard look, still trying to judge how far V could trust me. I don't know that they are mistaken about the unraveling. I hope they are, but I don't know it for sure. I thought that over. You mean the distortion in the mixing before the Aleph moment could be enough to have prevented the unraveling so far? But once the TOE is completed... That's right. I felt a chill, more of incomprehension than fear. And you still tried to protect Mosala, believing there was a chance that she could end everything? Achilles stared at the floor, trying to find the right words. If it does happen, we won't even have time to know it. But I still think it would have been wrong to kill her. Unless the unraveling was absolutely uncertain. Was absolutely certain. It's certainly certain. Unless the unraveling was absolutely certain, and there was no other way to stop it. No one can deal with an unknown chance of the end of the universe. How many people can you kill for a cause like that? 1? 100? 1,000,000? It's like trying to manipulate an infinitely heavy weight on the end of an infinitely long lever. However fine your judgment is, you know it can't be good enough. All you can do is admit that and walk away. Before I could reply, Sisyphus said, I think you'll want to see this. The fishing boat with the moderates had been intercepted off the coast of New Zealand. The news footage showed people in handcuffs being herded ashore from a patrol boat onto floodlit docks, eyes downcast. 5, Giorgio, who'd lectured me on the unraveling. 20, who'd refused to let me leave the boat with their confession in my gut. Others were missing, though. Then sailors followed, carrying the bodies on stretchers. They were covered in sheets, but the U-mail, 3, was unmistakable. The journalist spoke of suicide pacts. Helen Wu was mentioned by name, dead from poison. The first scenes of the arrest had filled me with the buzz of righteous euphoria at the prospect of these fanatics facing justice, but I felt nothing but enervating horror as I tried to understand what had gone on in their minds in the last moments. Maybe they'd seen the reports of ranting distress victims, and some had concluded that the unraveling was inevitable, others that it was now impossible. Or maybe the whole convoluted logic of their actions had simply unwound, leaving them staring at the unadorned truth of what they'd done. I couldn't judge them. I didn't know how I could have clawed my way up if I'd spiraled down into the nightmare of believing what they'd believed. I might have struggled hard to reason all of anthrocosmology out of existence. But if I'd failed, would I have had the humility, or the genocidal irresponsibility, to walk away from the implications, to refuse to intervene. Outside, people were roaring with laughter. In the square, someone turned the music up insanely loud for a second, distorting it into booming bass static, shaking the ground. Achille held conference with the other mainstream ACs. Someone was hacking into a WHO computer to get the unofficial latest figures for reported cases of distress. 9,020. V turned to me with a sharp intake of breath. I didn't know if it was panic or the exhilaration of freefall. Tripled in 2 days. And you still think it's a virus? No. Even without this inexplicable burst of contagion, I knew my targeted neuroactive mutant bioweapon theory wouldn't stand up to any scrutiny at all. But we can still both be wrong, can't we? Maybe. I hesitated. If it's this fast now, then after the Aleph moment? I don't know. It could sweep the planet in a week, or an hour. The faster the better. Less suffering for the people who see it coming, but don't yet understand. Achille closed Viz's eyes, began to put Viz's face in Viz's hands, stopped, clenched Viz's fists. When it comes, it better be sweet. The truth you can't escape had better be sweet. I moved closer and put my arm around Ver and swayed our bodies gently together from side to side. One sec, let me deal with a Twitch bot real quick. Be banished. Erased from existence. Sarah arrived barely a minute later than promised. She sat on my suitcase and we talked for her camera eyes. Sometimes we had to shout to make ourselves heard, but software would bring the noise of the celebrations down to an atmospheric murmur. Sarah and I had never been more than casual acquaintances. I'd only spoken to her in person 12 times before, but for me she came from the world beyond Stateless, the time before the conference. She was living proof of that era of sanity. And it only took one third party, there in the flesh, to anchor me to normality, to render me certain, again, that Achille was wrong. Distress was a mundane horror, no different from cholera. The universe was oblivious to human explanation. The laws of physics always had been, and always would be, solid, all the way down to the bedrock of the TOE, whether or not they were understood. And, though we weren't going out in real time, she'd brought her audience with her. Under the potential scrutiny of 10 million people, what else could I do but think what they expected me to think, give in to their consensus, conform? Achille, too, seemed to relax, but whether Sarah's presence anchored Ver in the same way, or merely served as a welcome distraction, I couldn't tell. Sarah guided us deftly through our roles in Violet Mosala, victim of anthrocosmology. The deposition I'd made for Joe Kepa had stuck to the legally pertinent facts. This interview pretended to probe the moral and philosophical depths of the AC's conspiracy. But Achille and I both talked of the fishing boat and the moderates' insane beliefs, as if we had no doubt that their whole worldview, as much as their violent methods, deserved only contempt, as if nothing remotely similar could have crossed our own minds in 1,000 years. And it all became news. It all became history. Sarah was doing her job flawlessly. But for the record, the three of us willingly steamrollered flat every unspoken fear, every qualm, every trace of doubt that the world could ever be different from the net's pale imitation of it. We were almost finished. I was on the verge of recounting the events in the ambulance when my notepad chimed. It was a coded trill for a call to be taken only in private. If I answered, the communications software would shift to deepest encryption automatically, but if the notepad sensed other people within earshot, it would refuse to maintain the connection. I excused myself and left the tent. The sky showed a faint wash of gray over the stars. Music and laughter still flooded out of the square behind the markets, and people were still roaming the camp, but I found a secluded spot nearby. De Groot said, "Andrew, are you all right? Can you talk?" She looked haggard and tense. "I'm fine. A little bruised by the quake, that's all." I hesitated. I couldn't bring myself to ask the question.
"Violet died about 20 minutes ago."
De Groot's voice faltered, but she steeled herself and pushed on wearily.
"No one knows exactly why yet. Some kind of trap sprung by one of the antiviral magic bullets. Maybe an enzyme in concentrations too weak to detect, which converted it into a toxin."
She shook her head, disbelieving.
"They turned her body into a minefield. What did she ever do to deserve that? She tried to find a few simple truths, a few simple patterns to the world."
I said, "They've been caught. They'll stand trial, and Violet will be remembered. For centuries." It was all hollow comfort, but I didn't know what else to say. And I'd thought I'd been prepared for this news ever since I'd heard she was in a coma, but it still came like a sudden blow to the head, as if the anarchists' astonishing reversal of fortune and Sarah's miraculous reappearance had somehow rewritten the odds. I covered my eyes with my forearm for a moment and saw her sitting in her hotel room beneath the skylight, raked by the sun, reaching out and taking my hand.
"Even if I'm wrong, there has to be something down there, or nobody could even touch."
De Groot said,
"How soon can you get off the island?"
She sounded more than a little concerned, which was touching but strange. We'd hardly been that close. I laughed dismissively. "Why? The anarchists have won. The worst is over. I'm sure of that." De Groot did not look sure at all. "Have you heard something? From your political contacts?" There was a sudden chill in my bowels, like the disbelief I'd felt before each new spasm from the cholera. It can't be happening again.
"This isn't about the war, but you're stuck, aren't you?"
"For now. Are you going to tell me what this—"
"We had a message, just after Violet died, a threat from the anthrocosmologists." Her face contorted with anger. "Not the ones on the boat, obviously. So it must have come from the ones who killed Buzo."
"Saying what?"
"Shut down all of Violet's calculations. Present them with a verified audit trail for her supercomputer account, proving that all the records of her TOE work have been erased without being copied or read."
I made a sound of derision. "Yeah? Where do they think that will get them? All her methods and ideas have been published already. Somebody else will duplicate everything. In a year at the most." De Groot seemed indifferent to the AC's motives. She just wanted an end to the violence.
"I've shown the message to the police here, but they say there's nothing anyone can do with Stateless the way it is."
She caught herself. She still hadn't spelled it out.
"The threat is, we post the audit trail within an hour, or they kill you."
Right. I could see the logic of it. De Groot and Mosala's family would all be too well guarded to threaten directly, but they'd hardly sit back and let the extremists kill me after I'd helped get Violet off Stateless.
"The calculations were already completed when I logged on. Lucky Violet programmed her net broadcast to wait until the hour."
De Groot laughed softly.
Her idea of making it a formal occasion. "We'll do what they've asked, of course. The police advised me not to call you, and I know the news does you no good, but I still thought you had a right to be told."
I said, "Don't do anything. Don't erase a single file. I'll call you back very soon." I broke the connection. I stood there in the alley for several seconds, listening to the wild music, chilled by the wind, thinking it through. When I walked into the tent, Sarah and Akili were laughing. I'd meant to invent an excuse to get Sarah out quietly so we could both just walk away, but it struck me at that moment that it would do me no good. Buzo had been killed with a gunshot, but their favorite methods were biological. If I fled, the chances were that I'd be carrying the weapon inside me. I reached down and grabbed Achille by the front of V's jacket and sent Ver sprawling backward onto the floor. V stared up at me, faking shock, anguish, bewilderment. I knelt down over Ver and punched Ver in the face, clumsily, surprised that I'd even got this far. I was no good at violence, and I'd expected Ver to defend herself with all the agility V'd demonstrated on the boat, long before I'd lain a finger on Ver. Sarah was outraged. "What are you doing? Andrew!" Achille just stared at me, speechless, hurt, still playing dumb. I lifted Ver half off the ground with one hand. V barely resisted, then punched Ver again. I said evenly, "I want the antidote. Now. Do you understand? No more threats to de Groot, no files destroyed, no negotiations. You're just going to hand it over." Achilles searched my face, clinging to the charade, protesting innocence with V's eyes like some wrongfully accused lover. For a moment, I wanted to hurt Ver badly. I had idiot visions of some bloody catharsis, washing the pain of betrayal away. But the thought of Sarah recording it all kept me in check. I never found out what I would have done if we'd been alone. And my rage slowly ebbed. V'd infected me with cholera, slaughtered 3 people, manipulated my pathetic emotional needs, used me as a hostage. But V hadn't, remotely, betrayed me. It had all been an act from the start. There'd never been anything between us to be sacrificed to the cause. And if the solace I thought we'd given each other had only been in my head, then so was the humiliation. I'd live. Sarah said sharply, "Andrew!" I glanced at her over my shoulder. She was livid. She must have thought I'd gone insane. I explained impatiently. "That call was from Karine de Groot. Violet's dead. And now the extremists have threatened to kill me if de Groot doesn't trash the TOE calculations." Achille mimed grave consternation. I laughed in V's face. "Okay, but what makes you think Achille's working for the extremists? It could be anyone in the camp. Achille is the only person besides me and de Groot who knew about Mossala's joke on the ACs." "What joke?" "In the ambulance." I'd almost forgotten. I hadn't reached the end of the story for Sarah. Violet programmed software to write up the calculations, polish the TOE, and dispatch it over the net. And the work's all completed. De Groot only caught it before it was sent. Sarah fell silent. I turned to her warily, still expecting Achille to make a move once my guard was down. She had a gun in her hand. "Stand up, please, Andrew." I laughed wearily. "You still don't believe me? You'd rather trust this piece of shit? Just because V was your source?" "I know V didn't send that message to de Groot." "Yeah? How?" "Because I did. I sent it." I stood up slowly, turning to face her, refusing to accept this ridiculous claim. The music from the square surged madly again, making the whole tent hum. She said, "I knew there were calculations in progress, but I thought they still had days to run. I had no idea we'd cut it so fine." My ears were ringing. Sarah watched me calmly, aiming the gun with unwavering conviction. She must have made contact with the extremist when she'd been researching Holding Up the Sky, and no doubt she'd intended to expose them once she had the whole story. But they would have realized how valuable she could be to them, and before resorting to killing her, they would have tried everything possible to bring her round to their point of view. And they'd succeeded. In the end, they'd convinced her to swallow it all. Any TOE would be an atrocity, a crime against the human spirit, an unendurable cage for the soul. That was why she'd worked so hard to get Violet Mossala. Referring to the documentary, not the person. It's in italics. And when she'd lost it, she'd had someone infect me with the cholera, modified to do the job indirectly. But they'd been sloppy with the timing provisions needed to accommodate the last-minute change of plan. Nishide and Buzo she'd dealt with in person. And I'd just destroyed every chance of trust, every chance of friendship, every chance of love I might have found with Akili. I'd beaten it all into the ground. I covered my face with my hands and stood there wrapped in the darkness of solitude, ignoring her commands. I didn't care what she did. I had no reason to go on. Akili said, "Andrew, do as she says. It'll be okay." I looked at Sarah. She had the gun raised, and she was repeating angrily, "Call de Groot!" I took out my notepad and made the call. I swept the camera around to illustrate the situation. Sarah gave detailed instructions to de Groot, a procedure for transferring authority over Mosala's supercomputer account. De Groot seemed to be in shock at first, stunned to learn of Sarah's allegiance. She complied with barely a word. Then her anger boiled to the surface, and she interjected sardonically, "All your resources and expertise, and you couldn't even have an academic account hacked open?" Sarah was almost apologetic. Not for lack of trying, but Violet was paranoid. She had good protection. De Groot was incredulous. "Better than Thoughtcraft's?" "What?" De Groot addressed me. "They pulled a childish stunt when Wendy was in Toronto. They hacked into Caspar and had it spouting their stupid theories. All for the sake of what? Intimidation? The programmers had to shut it down to go to backups. Wendy didn't even know what it meant, until I had to tell her who was trying to kill her daughter." I heard Akili, still on the floor at my feet, inhale sharply. And then I understood, too. Free fall. Sarah frowned, irritated by the distraction. "She's lying." She took out her own notepad and checked something, still holding the gun on me. "Break the connection, Andrew." I did. Akili said, "Sarah, have you been following Distress?" "No, I've been busy." She examined her notepad warily, as if it were a bomb that needed defusing. Mosala's work was all there in her hands now, and she had to be sure she destroyed it, thoroughly and irrevocably, without letting it taint her. Akili persisted. "You've lost, Sarah. The Aleph moment has passed." She glanced up from the screen at me. "Would you shut her up? I don't want to hurt her, but—" I said, "Distress is a plague of mixing with information. I thought it was an organic virus, but Caspar proves that it can't be." Sarah scowled. "What are you saying? You think de Groot read the finished TOE paper and became the keystone?" She held up her notepad triumphantly, with an audit trail displayed. "Nobody's read the paper. Nobody's accessed the final results." Except the author. Wendy sent Violet a Caspar clonelet. It wrote the paper. It pulled all the calculations together. And it's become the keystone. Sarah was incredulous. "A piece of software?" Akili said, "Scan the nets for lucid distress victims. Hear what they have to say." "If this is some kind of ridiculous bluff, you're wasting—" Sisyphus interrupted cheerfully. "This pattern of information requires itself to be encoded in germanium phosphide crystals in an artifact designed in collaboration with organic—" Sarah screamed at me wordlessly, waving the gun above her head, casting wild, belligerent shadows on the walls of the tent. I hit the mute button and killed the audio. The declaration continued silently in text flowing across the screen. My mind was reeling at the implications. But I'd lost my death wish, and Sarah had my full attention. Akili spoke calmly but urgently. "Listen to me. Distress numbers must be exploding already, and with a software keystone, a machine worldview, the mixing's going to keep wrecking people's minds until someone reads the TOE paper." Sarah was unmoved. "You're wrong. There is no keystone. We've won. We've left the last question unanswered." She smiled at me suddenly, radiantly, lost in some private apotheosis. "It doesn't matter how small the loophole is, the residue of uncertainty." "Oh, that's a comma, not a semicolon.
It doesn't matter how small the loophole is, the residue of uncertainty. In the future, we'll know how to enlarge it. And we'll never be brute machines. We'll never be mere physical beings, so long as there's still that hope of transcendence.
I kept my expression deadpan. The music swelled. The two tall Polynesian women, militia members, creeping in behind her, raised their truncheons and struck together. She went down cold. One of them dropped to her knees to inspect Sarah. The other eyed me curiously.
So what was her problem?
She was high on something. Achille climbed to Viz's feet beside me. I said, She came in here ranting, stole Viz's notepad. We couldn't get any sense out of her.
Is that true?
Achille nodded meekly. The militia members looked suspicious. They took possession of the gun with obvious distaste, but handed Achille the notepad.
Okay, we'll take it to the first aid tent. Some people just don't know how to enjoy themselves.
We should restart Mosala's dispatch procedure. Scatter the TOE over the net. Achille sat beside me, tense with urgency, the notepad in one hand. I struggled to focus my thoughts. The situation eclipsed everything which had happened between us, but I still couldn't look her in the eye. Achilles' knowledge miner had already counted more than 100 new cases of distress in 5 minutes, via media reports of people dropping in the streets. I said, We can't scatter it, not until we know if that would make things better or worse. All your models, all your predictions have failed. Maybe Caspar proves that the mixing is real, but everything else is still guesswork. Do you want to send every TOE theorist on the planet insane? Achille turned on me angrily. It won't do that. This is the cure, as well as the cause. It just needs one last step. It just needs a human interpretation. But V did not sound convinced. Maybe the whole truth was even worse than the distorted glimpse which led to distress. Maybe there was nothing ahead but madness. Do you want me to prove that? Do you want me to read it first? V raised the notepad. I grabbed Viz's arm. Don't be stupid. There are too few people who even half understand what's going on to risk losing one of you. We sat there, frozen. I stared at my hand where it held Ver. I could see where I'd broken the skin, striking Viz's face. I said, You think Caspar's view is too much for most people to swallow? You think someone has to step in and interpret it, to bridge the difference in perspectives? Then you don't want an expert, in TOEs or in anthrocosmology. You want a science journalist. Achille let me drag the notepad from Viz's hand. I thought of the hopeless screaming woman thrashing on the floor in Miami, and the briefly lucid victims who'd clung to their sanity only minutes longer. I had no wish to follow them. If there was one remaining purpose to my life, though, this was it. To prove that the truth could always be faced, explained, demystified, accepted. This was my job. This was my vocation. I had one last chance to try to live up to it. I stood. I'll have to leave the camp. I can't concentrate with all this noise, but I'll do it. Achille was huddled on the ground with Viz's head bowed. V said quietly, without looking up, I know you will. I trust you. I left the tent quickly and headed south. Stars still showed dimly in half the pale sky. The wind from the reefs was colder than ever. 100 meters into the desert, I stopped and raised the notepad. I said, Show me A Tentative Theory of Everything by Violet Mosala. I took off the blindfold. Chapter 30. I kept walking as I read, half-consciously retracing the steps I'd taken some 8 hours before. The reef rock hadn't fissured in the quake, but the ground's texture seemed to have been transformed in some subtle way. Maybe the pressure waves had realigned the polymer chains, forging a new kind of material, the island's first ever geological metamorphosis. Out in the desert, away from all the factions of anthrocosmology, the anarchists' heedless rejoicing, the mounting reports of distress, I did not know what I believed. If I'd felt the weight of 10 billion people slipping into madness around me, I know I would have been paralyzed. I must have been saved in part by lingering skepticism, and in part by sheer curiosity. If I'd surrendered to the appropriate human responses, blind panic and awestruck humility, in the face of the magnitude of everything which supposedly lay in the balance, I would have thrown the poisoned chalice of the notepad away. So I emptied my mind of everything else, and let the words and equations take over. The Caspar clonelet had done a good job. I had no trouble understanding the paper. The first section contained no surprises at all. It summarized Mosala's 10 canonical experiments, and the way in which she'd computed their symmetry-breaking properties. It ended with the TOE equation itself, which linked the 10 parameters of broken symmetry to a sum over all topologies. The measure Mosala had chosen to give weight to each topology was the simplest, the most elegant, the most obvious of all the possible choices. Her equation couldn't grant the universe the inevitability of freezing out of pre-space which Buzo and Nishide had sought to contrive, but it showed how the 10 experiments, and by extension everything from mayflies to colliding stars, were bound together, were able to coexist. In an imaginary space of great abstraction, they all occupied exactly the same point. Past and future were bound together too. Down to the level of quantum randomness, Mosala's equation encoded the common order found in every process, from the folding of a protein to the spreading of an eagle's wings. It delineated the fan of probabilities linking any system at any moment to anything it might become. In the second section, Caspar had trawled the databases for other references to the same mathematics, other resonances to the same abstractions, and in this scrupulously completist search, it had found enough parallels with information theory to push the TOE one step further. Everything Mosala would have spurned, and Helen Wu would have feared to combine, Caspar had serenely brought together. There could be no information without physics. Knowledge always had to be encoded as something. Marks on paper, knots on a string, pockets of charge in a semiconductor. But there could be no physics without information. A universe of purely random events would be no universe at all. Deep patterns, powerful regularities were the whole basis of existence. So, having determined which physical systems could share a universe, Caspar had asked the question, which patterns of information could those systems encode? A second, analogous equation had emerged from the same mathematics, with almost no effort at all. The informational TOE was the flip side of the physical TOE, an inevitable corollary. Then Caspar had unified the two, fitting them together like interlocking mirror images. In spite of everything, I had a feeling that symmetry's champion would have been proud. And all of the predictions of anthrocosmology had come tumbling out. The terminology was different. Caspar had innocently coined new jargon, unaware of the unpublished precedents, but the concepts were unmistakable. The Aleph moment was as necessary as the Big Bang. The universe could never have existed without it. Caspar had shied away from claiming the honor of being Keystone, and had even refused to grant the explanatory Big Bang primacy over the physical one, but the paper stated clearly that the TOE had to be known, had to be understood to have ever had force. Mixing, too, was inevitable. Mixing, too, was inevitable. Latent knowledge of the TOE infected all of time and space. Every system in this universe encoded it. But once it was understood explicitly, that hidden information would crystallize out wherever the possibility arose, percolating up through the foam of quantum randomness. It was more like cloud seeding than telepathy. Nobody would read the mind of the keystone, but they'd follow the keystone in reading the TOE, which their own minds, their own flesh, already encoded. And even before the Aleph moment, the mixing would happen, albeit imperfectly. But not for long. In the last section, Caspar predicted the unraveling. The Aleph moment would be followed, on a timescale of seconds, by the degeneration of physics into pure mathematics. Just as the Big Bang implied pre-space before it, an infinitely symmetric roiling abstraction where nothing really existed or happened, the Aleph moment would bring on the informational mirror image, another infinite wasteland without time or space. These words prophesying the end of the universe had been written half an hour before I was reading them. Caspar had not become the keystone. I lowered the notepad and looked around. The lagoon had come into view in the distance, silver-gray with the hint of dawn. A few bright stars remained in the west. I could still hear the music from the celebrations faintly, a distant, tuneless hum. The mixing took place so smoothly that I barely knew when it began. Listening to Reynolds' distress victims, I'd imagined them granted X-ray vision and more, assailed by images of molecules and galaxies, reeling at the universe in every grain of sand. And they were the lucky few. I'd steeled myself for the worst, the sky peeling open to reveal some mystical Renaissance wet dream of Stargate acid-trip stupefaction, the end of thought, the candied incineration of reason. The reality could not have been more different. Like the coded markings of the reef rock, the surface of the world began to speak of its depths and its hidden connections. It was like learning to read a new language, in seconds, and seeing the beautiful but hitherto merely decorative calligraphy of a foreign alphabet transformed before my eyes, acquiring meaning without changing its appearance in any way. The fading stars described their fusion fires, the crush of gravity held in check by the liberation of binding energy. The pale air, reddened in the east, deftly portrayed its own biased scatter of photons. The lightly rippled water hinted at the play of intermolecular forces, the strength of the hydrogen bond, the gentle elasticity of a surface trying to minimize its contact with the air. And all of these messages were written in a common language. It was clear at a glance that they belonged together. No wheels within wheels, no dazzling cosmic technoporn, no infernal diagrams. No visions. Just understanding. I pocketed the notepad and spun around, laughing. There was no overload, no crippling flood of information. The messages were always there, but I could take them or leave them. At first, it was like skipping over text with glazed eyes, requiring a conscious shift of focus, but with a few moments' practice, it became second nature. This was the world as I'd always strived to see it. Majestically beautiful, intricate, and strange, but at its core harmonious, and hence ultimately comprehensible. It was not a reason for terror. It was not a reason for awe. The mixing began to cut deeper. I grew aware of my own physicality, my own nature within the TOE. The connections I'd seen in the world reached into me and bound me to everything in sight. There was, still, no X-ray vision, no double helix dream, but I felt the immutable grammar of the TOE in my limbs, in my blood, in the dark glide of consciousness. It was the lesson of the cholera, only starker and clearer. I was matter, like everything else. I could feel the slow decay of my body, the absolute certainty of death. Every heartbeat spelled out a new proof of mortality. Every moment was a premature burial. Brr. There's a couple words that I'll stumble over consistently. Burial seems to be one of them. Corridor. Oh my god, corridor is my nemesis. I don't know why. My mouth hates it. I inhaled deeply, studying the events which followed the inrush of air, and I could trace the sweetness of the odor and the cooling of the nasal membranes, the satisfying fullness of the lungs, the surge of blood, the clarity delivered to the brain. All back to the TOE. My claustrophobia evaporated. To inhabit this universe, to coexist with anything, I had to be matter. Physics was not a cage. Its delineation between the possible and the impossible was the bare minimum that existence required. And the broken symmetry of the TOE, hacked out of the infinite paralyzing choices of pre-space, was the bedrock on which I stood. I was a dying machine of cells and molecules. I would never be able to doubt that again. But it was not a path into madness. The mixing had still more to show me. The message of introspection grew richer. I'd read the explanatory threads fanning out from the TOE, binding me to the world, but now the threads which explained my thoughts began to turn back toward their source. So I followed them down, and I understood what my own mind was creating through understanding. Interacting symbols coded as firing patterns in neural pathways, rules of dendritic growth and connection, synaptic weight adjustment, neurotransmitter diffusion, a chemistry of membranes, ion pumps, proteins, amines, all the detailed behavior of molecules and atoms, all the laws governing their necessary constituents, layer after layer of converging regularity, right down to the TOE. There was no arena of disinterested physics. There was no solid layer of objective laws. Just a deep circulating convection current of explanation, a causal magma upwelling from the underworld and then plunging down again into darkness, churning from TOE to body to mind to TOE, held up by nothing but the engine of understanding. There was no bedrock, no fixed point, no place to rest. I was endlessly treading water. I sank to my knees, fighting away vertigo. I lay face down, clinging to the reef rock. The cool solidity of the ground refuted nothing. But did it need to? Held up by aloof, timeless laws, or held up by the bootstrap of explanation, it endured, regardless. I thought of the inland divers who'd descended through every layer of the unnatural ecology which kept this island afloat, who'd witnessed the subterranean ocean ceaselessly corroding the rock from below. They'd walked away, dazed but exalted. I could do the same. I rose to my feet unsteadily. I thought it was over. I thought I'd come through the mixing unscathed. Caspar could not have become the keystone, and yet somehow the Aleph moment must have passed safely, removing the distortion, banishing distress. Maybe some mainstream AC had hacked into Mosala's account upon learning of her death, and had grasped some crucial error in Caspar's analysis before I'd read a word of it. Achille was approaching, an indistinct figure in the distance, but I knew it could be no one else. I raised a hand tentatively, then waved in triumph. The figure waved back, stretching his giant shadow west across the desert. And everything I'd learned came together, like a thunderclap, like an ambush. I was the keystone. I'd explained the universe into being, wrapped it around the seed of this moment, layer after layer of beautiful convoluted necessity. The blazing wasteland of galaxies, 20 billion years of cosmic evolution, 10 billion human cousins, 40 billion species of life, the whole elaborate ancestry of consciousness flowed out of this singularity. I had no need to reach out and imagine every molecule, every planet, every face. This moment encoded them all. My parents, friends, lovers, Gina, Angelo, Lydia, Sarah, Violet Mosala, Bill Monroe, Adele Vunibobo, Karine de Groot, Achille. Even the helpless, bellowing strangers, victims of the same revelation, had only been mouthing distorted echoes of my own horror at the understanding that I'd created them all. This was the solipsistic madness I'd seen reflected in that first poor woman's face. This was distress. Not fear of the glorious machinery of the TOE, but the realization that I was alone in the darkness with 100 billion dazzling cobwebs wrapped around my non-existent eyes. And now that I knew it, the breath of my own understanding would sweep them all away. Nothing could have been created without the full knowledge of how it was done, without the unified TOE, physical and informational. No keystone could have acted in innocence, forging the universe unaware. But that knowledge was impossible to contain. Caspar had been right. The moderates had been right. Everything which had breathed fire into the equations would now unravel into empty tautology. I raised my face to the blank sky, ready to part the veil of the world and find nothing behind it. Then Achille called my name, and I stopped dead. I looked down at Ver, beautiful as ever, unreachable as ever, unknowable as ever. And I saw the way through. I saw the flaw in Caspar's reasoning which had kept it from becoming the keystone, an unexamined assumption, an unasked question, not yet true or false. Could one mind alone explain another into being? The TOE equation said nothing. The canonical experiments said nothing. There was nowhere to look for the answer but my own memories, my own life. And all I had to do was tear myself out of the center of the universe. All I had to do to prevent the unraveling was give up one last illusion. Epilogue. As the plane touches down, I begin recording. Witness confirms. Cape Town, Wednesday, April 15th, 2105. 7:12:10 GMT. Karine de Groot has come to the airport to meet me. She looks astonishingly healthy, much more so in the flesh, though, as with all of us ancients, the losses are etched deep. We exchange greetings, then I glance around trying to take in the profusion of styles in anatomy and dress. No more than anywhere else, but every place has a different mix, a different set of fashions. Imposing retractable cowls full of dark violet photosynthetic symbionts seem to be popular throughout southern Africa. Back home, sleek amphibian adaptations for underwater breathing and feeding are common. Adaptions, not adaptations. It could be a Australianism, I'm not sure. So this is 50 years later, basically. For anyone wondering, I believe it started in 2055. That sounds right. Let me just double check that to be sure. I know it doesn't get mentioned for like the first couple chapters. I'll look for it later. After the Aleph moment, people had feared that the mixing would impose uniformity. It had never happened, any more than, in the age of ignorance, the brutal, inescapable truths that water was wet and the sky was blue had forced everyone on the planet to think and act identically. There are infinitely many ways to respond to the single truth of the TOE. What's become impossible is maintaining the pretense that every culture could ever have created its own separate reality, while we all breathed the same air and walked the same ground. De Groot checks some schedule in her mind's eye. So you didn't come straight from Stateless? No, Malawi. There was someone I had to see. I wanted to say goodbye. We descend to the subway, where the train is expecting us and lights a path for our eyes to the carriage door. It's almost 50 years since I've been in this city, and most of the infrastructure has changed. In unfamiliar surroundings, the TOE blazes out of every surface, unbidden, like an exuberant child boasting of the bright new things V's made. Even the simplest novelties, the non-slip, dirt-eating coating on the floor tiles, the luminous pigments of the living sculptures, catch my attention as they spell out their unique ways of coexisting. Nothing is incomprehensible. Nothing can be mistaken for magic. I say, when I first heard that they were building the Violet Mosala Memorial Kindergarten, I imagined she would have been insulted, which only goes to show how little I knew her. I don't know why I was invited. De Groot laughs. I'm just glad you didn't come all this way for the ceremony and nothing else. You could have done it on the net. No one would have minded. There's nothing like being there. The train reminds us of our stop, holds the doors for us. We walk through the neat suburbs not far from the house where Mosala spent her childhood, though the streets now are lined with species of plants she would never have recognized. She never saw trees growing on Stateless either. People stride past us, glancing up at the elegant logic of the cloudless blue sky. The kindergarten is a small building, reconfigured into an auditorium for the occasion. Half a dozen speakers are here to address the 50 children. I lapse into reverie until one of Violet's granddaughters, working on the Halcyon, explains the starship's drive. The core principle, close to the TOE, is easy to grasp. Karine de Groot speaks about Violet, anecdotes of generosity and intransigence. And one of the children sets the stage for me, telling the others about the age of ignorance. It hangs like a stalactite from the information cosmos. The present tense is sophistication, not solecism. Relativity demands it. It's not autonomous, it doesn't explain itself. It just needs to be joined to the information cosmos in order to exist. We need it too, though. It's a necessary history, a logical outgrowth if you try to extend time before the Aleph moment. V summons vivid diagrams and equations into the air. The brilliant stellar cluster of the information cosmos, wrapped densely in explanatory threads, holds up the simple drab cone of the age of ignorance, which points back to the physical Big Bang. V's audience of less precocious 4-year-olds struggle with the concepts. Time before the Aleph moment? Grandparents notwithstanding, it almost defies belief. I rise to my feet and recite my prepared version of the events of 50 years ago, getting laughs of incredulity in all the right places. Ownership of genes? Centralized authorities? Ignorance cults? Ancient history always sounds quaint, old victories preordained, but I try to convey some sense of how long and hard their ancestors struggled to learn everything they now take for granted. That law and morality, physics and metaphysics, space and time, pleasure, love, meaning, are all the burden of the participants. There are no immovable centers, dispensing absolutes like mana, no God, no Gaia, no beneficent rulers. No reality but the universe explained into being. No purpose to life unless we create it, together or alone. Someone asks about the turmoil in the days after Aleph. I say, everyone found the truth hard to swallow. Orthodox scientists, because the TOE had turned out to be grounded in nothing but its own explanatory powers. The ignorance cults, because even the participatory universe, the most subjective reality possible, was no synthesis of their favorite myths, which could never have created anything, but the product of universal scientific understanding of what coexistence really meant. Even the anthro-cosmologists turned out to have been wrong. They'd been so obsessed with the idea of a single keystone that they'd barely considered the possibility that everyone, equally, could play that role. They'd missed the most stable and symmetrical solution, where every mind obeys the TOE, but it takes all of them together to create it. One astute listener sees that I'm dodging the issue. A child I would have called human in the days before the H word exploded and it was finally understood. The TOE is all we have in common.
Most people weren't scientists, cultists, or anthro-cosmologists, were they? They had no stake in these ideas, so why were they so sad?
Sad. There were 9 million suicides. 9 million people we could not hold up when all illusions of solidity vanished. And I'm still not certain that there was no other way, that I found the only possible bridge into the information cosmos. If I'd let myself descend into the madness of distress, would someone else have asked a different last question and found another way through? No one has accused me, no one has judged me. I've never been damned as a criminal or hailed as a savior. The idea that a single keystone could ever have explained 10 billion people into existence is absurd now. In retrospect, distress is seen as no different from the naive illusion that every galaxy is rushing away from us, when in truth there is not, and cannot be, any center at all. I talk haltingly about Lamont's area. It made people think that they knew each other and could speak for each other, understand each other, much more than they really could. Some of you might still have it in your brain, but in the face of the evidence, now it's easy to ignore. I try to explain about the delusion of intimacy and how much was invested in it once. They listen politely, but I can see that it makes no sense to them, because they know full well that they've lost nothing. Love, in the face of the truth, has turned out to be stronger than ever. Happiness never really depended on the old lies. Not for these children, born without crutches. In Viz's home, in the dazzling, bounteous, engineered jungle of Malawi, I'd told Akili I was dying. After you, there was no one. And we'd touched for the last time. I move on quickly. Other people, I add, lamented the end of mystery, as if nothing would remain to be discovered once we understood what lay beneath our feet. And it's true that there are no more deep surprises. There's nothing left to learn about the reasons for the TOE or the reasons for our own existence. But there'll be no end to discovering what the universe can contain. There'll always be new stories written in the TOE, new systems, new structures, explained into being. There might even be other minds on other worlds, co-creators, whose nature we can't even imagine yet. Violet Mosala once said, "Reaching the foundations doesn't mean hitting the ceiling." She helped us all touch the foundations. I only wish she could have lived to see you building on them higher than anyone has built before. I take my seat. The children applaud politely, but I feel like a senile fool for telling them that their future is unbounded. They already knew that, of course. Author's note. Among many works which inspired me in the writing of this novel, I must single out Dreams of a Final Theory by Steven Weinberg, Culture and Imperialism by Edward W. Said, and Out of the Light, Back into the Cave by Andy Robertson, Interzone 65, November 1992. The excerpt from the poem Techno-Liberación is modeled on a passage from Aimé Césare's Notebook of a Return to the Native Land. And that was Distress. by Greg Egan. Pretty good stuff. It has been a long time since I read that one, and I think it holds up pretty well. Let's see. Oh, we've got a bunch of comments. Let's see. 5 of us here now from Russell Perry 9902. This sci-fi still ages well. I agree. Jay Waldrop says, yeah, a lot of the themes in Greg Egan's work are still relevant today. I agree. So as to why that is, I think kind of boils down to Greg Egan, their skiffy, their sci-fi, is typically so beyond the envelope in terms of, like, cutting edge, just dealing with high concepts frequently, that much of the popular culture has yet to catch up with stuff he was doing back in, like, the 90s, which is pretty great. But this one, yeah, this book held up pretty well, I feel. Reading through it, it's cool to see how there's kind of some hints all along the way. That he's going to become the Keystone, or at least Distress is, like, forcing him through time to come to terms with what it means to exist. Sending its shockwave back through time. There's hints to the whole, it'll be a broader, you won't have one Keystone, you'll have lots of them, due to, like, the partly through, like, the epidemiological spread almost of Distress to publishing the TOE everywhere, even though that gets undercut by events that occur. It winds up happening anyway. But yeah, no, it's a really happy ending. It's the mathpocalypse, but we come to terms with it. There's a couple books that have a mathpocalypse. Quarantine is kind of one of them, in the sense that in Quarantine, which incidentally I've already read and is saved in a playlist on my YouTube channel if you care to check it out. Basically, the solar system has been sealed off by a dimensional wall by someone outside. And that's just, like, background noise for the series. It's actually dealing more with eigenstates and other such fun things. And basically the reason the universe seals us off away from it is because of the way we perceive reality. We fundamentally change the quantum nature of everything to have a set form, and make it so that like what we perceive as reality, because of the observer effect, basically. And this causes mass havoc and catastrophes in the universe abroad. Aliens never really communicate with us. This is all revelations that our protagonist in that book twigs to. This is kind of like that in reverse. It's kind of a similar ending where, like, everything kind of opens up and you have kind of this perception, but in this case everyone can kind of make their own can be themselves in reality on their own terms, and that's okay. Which I think is actually a really nice message. Very transgressive, even, in every meaning of the term. So it's very much, the themes of, what's it called? Body dysmorphia, dysmorphia, and gender dysmorphia, that sort of thing. Those are all kind of, rolling around in the background. It's very rich. There's a lot going on in this one, which is one of the things I like about, particularly his early work. Has a lot of instances of there's a lot going on here. Permutation City has a bit of that. Quarantine has even more. This has maybe the most of all. There's so much going on in this one that it's almost overwhelming. When we get to... what is it? I think it's Diaspora, and then there's one other that's not necessarily set in the same setting or universe, but it's a very similar setting. Very, like, way out there post-human stuff. Very wild. Very, very, very wild stuff. Those have a lot going on. It's sort of funny, though, that when you get to, like, the Clockwork Rocket, he narrows his focus a lot, mostly to... Or the orthogonal trilogy, sorry. I keep calling it one thing or the other, and I never hold it down to the same name. The orthogonal trilogy, it winds up being a much more focused experience in terms of, like, there's like sociology in there. Part of the difficulty is they're not humans as we would understand them. They're because the laws of physics that they of the universe they exist in would not lead to humankind ever arising, but they are sentient people, and it's really a trilogy about these people learning how to understand their world, and thereby the audience reading the book learning how their world works. It's still probably the most dramatic and drastic example of world building I've ever read, and I give it props for that, but it is dry a lot of the time. And you don't have all this as much texture as, say, Distress does, as, say, Quarantine does, as, say, Permutation City does. Because, like, while, like, there's not much throwaway material, like, whereas in, like, Permutation City you have, like, throwaway, not characters, but, like, throwaway bits and bobs of what's going on, orbiting what becomes the main plot. That just help to flesh everything out, which is pretty nice. So their work, particularly in the last 10-odd years, has been a lot more laser-focused, I feel. Less, here, let's write a novel like William Gibson would write a novel, in terms of just throw tons of shit at the wall. I'm not going to promise that I'll get to Neuromancer this year, but I'll try. I know that's been requested. It's been a hot minute since I've read it myself, but it's like the amount of sheer detail density of Neuromancer is a little overwhelming sometimes. William Gibson isn't always that way. I think the other reason I'm hesitant to start doing a read-through of Neuromancer on here is because I will commit to doing the whole trilogy, and then I'll be committed to doing the whole trilogy. And I kind of want to avoid commitment for this year, just kind of mostly just individual books. Just this year. We'll see about next year, and we'll see how long I can keep that up. But yeah, so yeah, that was Distress. When next we see each other, hear each other, whatever, which should be this Tuesday. Yes, Tuesday, and I think Thursday, if memory serves. Tuesday and Thursday, we will be starting Cytine by C.J. Cherry, which is, gosh, how to describe Cytine? Well, it's not really a spy thriller. Kind of a sociological thriller. It's difficult to explain. It's science fiction. It involves cloning. It involves power structures, politics. It is a political thriller at its core, I guess. I guess you'd call it a political thriller at its core, although it doesn't focus on the politics too often. But it is important. It's a coming-of-age story, actually, in its way. It's a coming-of-age story, he says. Oh, how true it is. You won't know how true for a while. But has some... I think Cytine might have been my first formal introduction to C.J. Cherry as an author. So it's kind of near and dear to my heart. That one has power dynamics and abuse of power of certain people against other people.
I might have to put a warning on that one. I don't know. I'm of two minds putting like trigger warnings on video descriptions. On the one hand, I'm like, okay, I get it. I don't want to like damage anyone. But on the other hand, I'm like, most of these are books that have been around for a hot minute, a while, like decades. And I think we can all accept that they're fictional. But I also don't want to traumatize anyone. I don't know. I'll mention. I guess I might not put it in the stream description, but I'll mention it. There is abuse of power in Citeen that happens fairly close to the beginning. That will probably be distressing for some folks. I know. The more I think about it, the more horrifying it is. Who reads a description, Mark Twain? Good question. Good question, Mark. Marky Mark and his funky bunch, his Twainy bunch. Anyway. It can't be worse than the body horror we had to go through with this one, eh? That I'd totally forgotten about. I had completely forgotten about. Jesus, what's the short story where... that one still gives me the jeebs. And the heebs. The heebie-jeebs. I don't know if I read that short story collection yet. How many of his do I have left? I think I've read all the big ones. Yeah, I've gotten through Instantiation and Oceanic, haven't I? Pretty sure I did Instantiation. So I only have like his shorter short story collections left, which are Phoresis and Sleep and the Soul? Sleep and the Soul? Yes. Phoresis and Sleep and the Soul. Well, Phoresis and Other Stories. Other what? I can't read that from here. Other Journeys. They're both pretty good. Body horror is your favorite? Well, sir. If you haven't read Morphotrophic by Greg Egan yet, whoo boy, get on that one. I've got some stuff with some body horror in it, kind of lined up. I actually have I have one. It'll be actually a fantasy outing for once. That I have lined up. One that I haven't read in a while. I don't know when I'll get to it, but I do want to get to it, reading it aloud on stream this year. That another one that has nostalgia value for me. That's incredibly crass, like to the point of being bad taste. But there's some entertaining playing with fantasy tropes and Tolkien-esque settings in that one. I won't name it just yet. Let's see. Probably I'll do Alien Clay. That's got a little bit of that for you. That one's more of a sociological treatise. It's 1984 in space. And then some. Quite good. It was by, what's his name? Adrian Tchaikovsky, who I've never read anything by before. This was my introduction to him, and boy howdy, I'm going to be getting more of his work. So yeah, Citeen. We'll be doing some Citeen, which will take us a while. Citeen's pretty hefty. It's a pretty bulky volume. And it has a sequel, Regenesis, which is a direct sequel, and we will be going straight into that once we finish Citeen. Citeen, for what it's worth, is not about cyborg teenagers. It sort of seems like it's about cyborg teenagers, but it's not. It's a planet called Citeen. We're going to learn about life on that planet. We're going to learn about the social structures and the faction that lives there. What else? I had something important. Oh, right. What I wanted to do was I wanted to read the novel description of Distress to see if it seems familiar, because I know the tagline they have, like, I was like, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with anything. So the big bolded tagline on the back is, "It is the year 2055, and the battle of the sexes has 7 combatants instead of 2.
like it's the second one, Russell Perry. CY... Whoa, I can't type in the right section. I forgot that I have the my hotkey for muting myself is a letter. I need to change that. I need to change that toot sweet. So the tagline on the back cover of the book is, "It is the year 2055 and the Battle of the Sexes has 7 combatants instead of 2," which, like I said, has nothing to do with the book. Honestly, it's if you read that and expected it to be an in-depth treatise on the nature of trans existence, it'd be you would be sorely disappointed. You would get more out of oh God, what is that book? It had weird, like, hermaphrodite elf people that killed people if they came in them. I don't know why I got that and read it. I was very confused most of the way through. It was very angsty. Lots of angst. Wraithu? Something like that. I can't remember the author's name off the top. Books I'll probably never read on stream. There's some body horror in that one, but it was like... It was kind of like if you took the overwrought melodrama of a Anne Rice vampire and then made them into hermaphroditic elves. Like, with vague amounts of telekinesis and telepathy or something. / magic. I don't remember why I got that and read it, but I did. You would expect gender gladiators, exactly. You would expect gender gladiators. And there isn't any of that. So the rest of the description on the back of the book says, and this is, the edition I have is from I already said this at some point. The edition I'm holding is from 2015. It was originally published in 97, but the edition I'm holding is from Nightshade Books in 2015. And the back of the book says, journalist Andrew Worth is burned out after completing a documentary on controversial developments in biotechnology, and turns down a chance to report on a baffling new mental disorder known as distress. Instead, he takes what he believes will be a cushy job covering a scientific conference on the artificial island of Stateless, where a brilliant young South African physicist, Violet Mosala, is expected to present a theory of everything. But the assignment is not the tropical respite Worth was expecting, and on Stateless he discovers a seething maelstrom of plotting, assassination attempts, and rebellion. The world's only hope for survival lies in Mosala's research, but whether it will lead to the total destruction of life as we know it, or the complete remaking of the universe, may be a risk too dangerous to take. What? Okay. I guess that sentence makes sense. As the distress outbreak continues to mysteriously grow, Worth must race to find the truth behind the theory of everything, and what the implications of Mosala's work could mean for humanities. 7 genders enter, 1 gender leaves. Turns out the one gender is Keystone. Spoilers! So yeah, at least the back description is appropriate, but yeah, it is the year 2055, and the Battle of the Sexes has 7 combatants instead of 2. Each gender must choose a representative to represent them in glorious gladiatorial combat. It's like G Gundam. Only with fewer racial stereotypes. Anyway. So yeah. Sighteen, the day after tomorrow, which means I have to go look up cover art. Oh no! I have to find cover art. Oh, that's right, I meant to ask. Do people prefer the slideshow of covers with all the covers I find? Or just one at a time for a given stream? Feel free to tell me in the comments, or now, or on the Discord, or whatever. Gender Dome, says Jay Waldrop. Honestly, this is I could see this book being made. I would read the novel. I would read Gender Dome, the movie, the novel. Or the novel of the movie? The movie novel? The movie, the current... Speaking of movie novels, I have not seen Project Hail Mary. This is apropos of nothing. I didn't learn until it was out in theaters that there was a Operation Hail Mary movie by Andy Weir. I read the book ages ago. Somebody asked me to read it like ages ago, and I didn't get around to it, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did not read it before the movie came out. Now, of course, if I go and I read the book, now that the movie's out, everyone will be like, oh, well, he's reading the book because it was a movie. I only did that for The Martian, okay? Not Operation Hail Mary. Shoot. I am kicking myself like you wouldn't believe for not getting on that. For not having done it beforehand. So... now I'll never read Operation Hail Mary. Sorry, guys. Sorry, guys, it'll never get read because I'll look like a hack. A hack. I can't stand looking like a hack. I won't do it. I'll probably read it on stream anyway. I'm a coward. I like reading things that are fun to read, and it's a pretty fun book. A bit long in the tooth, though, to be honest. But, I don't know. It's okay. It's aight. It's not bad. It's not great. It's not bad. Not mind-blowing, I should say. It's not mind-blowing, but it's good. It's difficult when my book collection includes Greg Egan and Ian M. Banks, and it's like, oh, okay, well, you're going to have great difficulty comparing anyone to anything without being like, well, it's not as good as Dan Simmons, or it's not as good as C.J. Cherry, or it's not as good as Terry Pratchett. You know, it's like, yeah, well, obviously. You know, obviously it's not going to be as good as those guys. They're the greats. They're the all-timers, you know. But I think it's important to read diversely. This has turned into quite a ramble. So yeah. I definitely want to read the novel Space Opera on here. In space, no one can hear you sing. It's so good. I have no idea how I'm going to get through it, but it's so good. I had so much fun reading it. So that one, I have like a cluster of like 6 relatively recent, well, like 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish, 5-ish relatively recent books that I want to get to this year, in addition to all the others. Yes, Werner Vinge, David Brin, Heinlein, good stuff indeed. I will absolutely get around to doing the Uplift series. I will absolutely get around to doing that. It's too good not to. The first time I read through the stuff after Startide Rising, I think it is, like the first 3 books, the first time I read through the books that come after the first 3, I was kind of bummed. But by the end, I was like throwing my fist in the air cheering. I was like, this isn't what I signed up for. I wanted more of these guys. Of what was going on elsewhere. And then it's like, no, we get there. It's totally worth it. Very well done. Does a good job of tying itself up while leaving itself open to anything. And it's a brilliant setting for any side material. I have to reread through the, what's the name of that trilogy by Werner Vinge? I have to reread through that one. It's, A Deepness in the Sky, A Burning of the Something, Children of the Who, what's it? Frick. It's just outside my field of view. I can't see it from here. Oh, is it right there? No, it's behind those. I know where they are, but yeah, no, it's a whole bunch of all-time greats. It's tough, is what I'm saying. Is deciding what to read is harder than anything. So many good options. Come to think of it, I think it's been the Nightland was retro. I do want to read some retro stuff. I would kind of like to do Lensman on here, but Lensman is, I don't know. Part of me feels like it would be a betrayal of the person I hold up as the reason I started doing these. Reed McCollum from Books in Motion in Spokane, Washington. read through the entire Lensman series, and listening to those as actual audiobooks. Listening to those audiobooks convinced me that if this dude can do it, I can do it. TH3 Stig, the Stig, says, by the way, I've heard you say in one of your streams that you'd like to read some Philip K. Dick on stream. Is that still a plan? Yes, it is. Dick is another one. I love Dick. Take that how you will. I will. I'm not sure what... I probably won't read anything in any particular order. I'll probably avoid some of the stuff from, like, right at the end of his career, because that's when he starts... I feel like you need to see, in chronological order, his progression there, conceptually. I hesitate to use the term descent into madness, but it's kind of like a descent into madness. It's wild. So like the last 5 or 6 novels he does towards the end of his life, I'll probably do in chronological order. But stuff like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Man in the High Castle, I'll probably avoid Man in the High Castle. That's been adapted enough. What was the other one I wanted to get around to? There's another one. And I have this nice hardbound collection. Where are you? Let me yank it out here. You can't hear me because I'm walking away. Here we are. Where are you? Yeah, we'd be avoiding the Valis and later novels for a while, and Divine Invasion and Transmigration of Timothy Archer. Here we go. What do we got? Where are you? Scanner Darkly I'd probably do too, because that one's fun. Martian Time Slip, if it's the one I'm thinking of, was fun. But yeah, no, I'll definitely be doing more. I'll be doing some Philip K. Dick. This will happen. He's too important not to. I might still do the... Well, yeah, Schizophrenic Downfall is one way to put it. I'll wind up doing them on stream, but I kind of want to do them in, like, chronological order, just kind of so you can see where, you know, how the ideas that are bouncing around his head, and why they're bouncing, you know, and kind of what they lead to. Wild stuff happens in those. Like, I mean, yeah, there's not much that I'm going to say is going to be strictly verboten from the stream. Only, like, it'll only be books that I found borderline irredeemable. Like, I'm probably not going to do any Ayn Rand. Sorry, Rand fans, if you're out there. No. Certainly not The Fountainhead, and not Atlas, and probably not Atlas Shrugged, although at least that had something resembling a narrative. There's one or two Heinleins that I wouldn't do for a number of reasons. Honestly, the big one I wouldn't do by Heinlein is I Will Fear No Evil, mostly because I just felt so fucking robbed by the end of that. I was just like, nah, fuck all that. What do you mean? You're gonna do that? You blue ball me like that? Nah. Not that it felt... Mostly because the moment of blue balling, so to speak, comes after like a couple hundred pages of like, what are we doing here? Of just, I felt like my time was wasted, and I don't want to waste other people's time. I won't read Free Chocolate either on stream. I will eat Free Chocolate, not the book, on stream. What was that by? I don't even remember. I don't have my copy anymore. I got rid of it. I have never been so disappointed with a squandered concept of a book before. It was a real eye-opener. I'm like, holy shit, an author can completely throw away a premise. Just absolutely throw it away. Just have a brilliant premise and be like, I'm going to use this as toilet paper. I was frustrated, is what I'm saying. Yeah, this is a yap session, all right. Other books that I wouldn't read on stream. I mean, I'd even do A Stranger in a Strange Land, honestly. Although that's got, like, with the caveat that, like, there's he's got views. Some stuff happens in this book that's like sexy time adjacent. That's kind of wild, but at least you learn the background of the term grok. to grok, to understand completely and absolutely. So you'd get that at least. There's not much I wouldn't read on stream. Even stuff that's really racy, I'd probably do. I might not actually do Orson Scott Card though, because I'm like, I did a reread of Ender's Game and I'm like, I'm not saying that on stream. Sorry. Like 3 times in a row, I'm not saying that. Sorry, that's I'm not saying that. No. Like you gotta, and it's done. It makes me sound like a prude. Like I'm definitely gonna be getting around to reading Ring Shout by author whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm gonna get around to doing that, and that drops the N-word like crazy. Like that, it's all the time. I'm gonna do that. It's fine because the people doing it are generally the baddies. And it's done to show that they're the baddies. Whereas in Ender's Game, the word in question pops up, and it is done not only from the main character, but done kind of in malice. And I'm just like, fuck's wrong with you? Like, it's like, oh no, they're being playful. I'm like, nah, I'm not feeling that actually. I don't know how that bounced off me every other time I read it, but my recent reread, I was like, shit, am I woke now? I think I might be woke. Because this isn't doing it. Sorry, Ender's Game fans, I probably won't be reading your book on stream anytime soon. I might do it, if I'm desperate, but I've got so many other things to read through. What was the other one? There's another book that I probably wouldn't do. What's his name? The author is there's a couple John Ringo that I might do, even though I find John Ringo himself to be kind of reprehensible as a person. I take umbrage with his character, but he has been known to write some entertaining military sci-fi, but some of it is just kind of like oorah Murica porn, and I'm kind of like you know. All right, so you've now gazed into the abyss that is Frag's rambling brain. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to endure this. So yeah, day after tomorrow will be Sighteen o'clock. Tomorrow, I'm going to be exhausted and out of energy, so I apologize for that. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. And Thursday is probably going to be an even more tired, but we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Anything else salient? No, not really. No, nothing comes to mind. Well, thanks to everyone who tuned in. There were a lot of you today, at least 5 or 6, or 7 or something. My analytics software, my live analytics software doesn't necessarily give me accurate numbers, and I don't really look at it too often. I'm not in this for the money. Hence why you should not be getting advertisements. Buy only what I tell you to buy, not what Pappy Google tells you to buy. Your overlord does not know what is good for you. Only I can know what is good for you. You should not be getting ads. If you are, tell me, and I will double check the video in question. It might also just be like YouTube themselves doing it, in which case I might not have that kind of control, but so far I've been able to make sure that they are ad-free. I don't get paid for these. I am in a position where I could start getting paid for doing these. I'm not going to do that. People have floated to me the idea of setting up a Patreon or a Ko-fi account or whatever, or a Buy Me a Coffee. I haven't gotten around to doing that. I might do it. I am not desperate for cash. Who doesn't use AdBlock anyways? Indeed, Jay Waldrop. And commanding my purchasing power! Indeed. But yeah. I do these for fun. They're for funsies. If you enjoy them, then I have succeeded. If you don't enjoy them, I have failed. and as far as I'm concerned, they can live and die on those merits. It's okay. I do read all comments and feedback left in the comments sectiones. Oh shit, there's a lot of them. What happened? Oh god. He says he reads them, and there's so many. Cool. Thank you. Yes, that should all be set. Here we go. Visual Notion 3975 comments, I wonder why the first part doesn't have chapters, but the second does. Shit is getting real in that last scene. Ha ha ha. I'm very curious about the plans. The situation in which someone has to come up with a solution only using their minds is quite original. I don't find it that strange that the aliens can't read our thoughts. They didn't know they would need to in the first place. I agree. This is on the Dark Forest. In fact, in part 4. So yeah, I've got a number of comments here. So I do read them all. I don't respond to all of them, sorry. But I do read them all. I do take it all into account, even if it is not apparent that I do. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't, Yep. Yep, that's it. Stay safe, stay sane, be as toasty or cool as your geolocation and personal preferences permit. If you're anywhere near where I live, then you are having radical temperature shifts over the course of, like 2 days. Back and forth and back again, so one does not know where one stands. Right now, I think it's in the warming up phase, but tomorrow will be like 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And yesterday, it was 15. So, yo-yoing considerably. Terry Schaff says, you read beautifully. Greg Egan is a kind of hard sci-fi for me. Yes, Greg Egan can be quite tough to read. Sometimes he's throwing, oh my god, we haven't gotten to literally print graphs and charts and equations era Greg Egan yet. We haven't even gotten there yet, dude. Like, we're gonna hit, like, Schild's Ladder at some point, and it's just I'm gonna have to really scratch my head on how to present that. I do not know. I'll have to get an ebook and, like, rip the chart images. Oh my god. He's challenging. He's a challenging author. And it is very hard sci-fi. It's like he's dealing with concepts that most other sci-fi authors of any kind aren't even touching. It's one of the reasons I get almost every book he comes out with. With the exception of one, which I kept reading was kind of mediocre, but honestly, I find something to enjoy in everything he does. What was it titled? Does he have anything new? Nah, Morphotrophic's the latest thing he came out with. What was it called? Actually, the most recent thing he's published was a short story in Asimov's science fiction in November/December of 2025, entitled Spare Parts for the Mind, which I have not read. I'll have to do that. Perihelion Summer is the one I have not read by him yet. I'll get around to it eventually. Well, I'm glad that I'm able to do something for you, Teresha. That pleases me greatly. It is the highest praise, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, so that's it. I'm done yapping. Thanks again. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. Imagine if... live your life as if you were all the Keystone, and could warp your personal reality to whatever's going on at the end of the book. Oh, no. Jay Waldrop says, yeah, I listened to Echopraxia to fall asleep so much. I hear his voice when I started to read the book. Oh no! Oh no! I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. Well, maybe my worst enemy. Yes. Rent-free. Incidentally, if anyone's wondering how you can get a hold and listen to Echopraxia, join the Discord. I've got a link to a Google Drive where you can download the whole thing. I believe they're all in order. They might not be. I don't think I edited the titles, so they're probably not in order. You'll have to do that on your own. But they are all there. They're kind of hefty in size because I didn't edit them. I didn't optimize them in any way. They're just there. Yup. That reminds me, I've got to actually download stuff from like the last couple months so I have a backup in case my account got nuked for some hypothetical reason that I can't think of off the top of my head. There's always some possibility. Anyway, Tuesday, March 31st of 2026, Common Era, will be the start of Cytine. I will see you all there. Alrighty.